Hello, it is February the 14th, 2022. This is As the World Burns. I'm your host, Randall Burns. First off, folks, happy Valentine's Day. I have a long-standing connection to this holiday. What a lot of folks don't realize is that Valentine's Day is something that we inherited from the Roman era. In that era, it was actually a much more adult holiday, not the sanitized version of what we have today. It's basically a day when a lot of rules got lifted and people could get away with things they couldn't get away with the rest of the year. So, however you're celebrating it, I hope it's a good day for you today. Now, I've been asked by some readers about what the Fed is going to do and do I have any commentary on that. And I think this is going to take more than one video to really handle well. Today, I'm wanting to examine the incentives the Fed has and what the structure is that we can comment on. Now, I actually have a bit of a connection to the Fed familially. If you look at the map of Federal Reserve banks, you'll notice that there are two Federal Reserve banks in the state of Missouri. I grew up in the state of Missouri. My father grew up in the state of Missouri. In fact, the Burns family has been there since 1803. One of my ancestors, James Burns, was a contemporary of Daniel Boone, very, very early settler. And one of my great-grandfather, James Orrin Stark, the Starks are a prominent family in northeastern Missouri. One of my grandmother's cousins used to be governor of Missouri. And my great-grandfather was the campaign manager for a man named Champ Clark, who when Woodrow Wilson was running for president, was actually the front runner for the Democratic nomination that year, which meant that since the Republicans were split, that anyone who was running as a Democrat had a really good chance of running. And there were more than a few shenanigans pulled to put Woodrow Wilson in that position, and the basic reason is that he was literally the only major Democratic contender who was willing to play ball with the bankers and structure the Federal Reserve the way they wanted. And I was very close to my paternal grandmother, and she described that the day that she saw her father the most upset, I think she was about 13 at the time, was when the Federal Reserve Act was passed. Or more precisely, when Woodrow Wilson got the presidential nomination. And my great-grandfather knew that meant that something like the Federal Reserve Act would come to pass. So I'm not a fan of these folks and the structure that they put in place. I would probably have a different commentary than my great-grandfather would, but I think I might be able to talk to him about this in a reasonable fashion. Now, the Federal Reserve's formal charter is to ensure maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate interest rates. That's what they're officially entitled to do, or they are supposed to be doing. Okay. Now, to support these goals, they have become the major repository of economics research in the federal government. Now, part of the story on that one is there's been a campaign on the part of aspects of the Republican Party to eliminate anything that smacks of European-style economic planning, I think was the term that they used. And that has gutted a lot of the independent analytical ability of Congress and the federal government. I mean, there just used to be a lot more research along those lines, and a lot of what's left is done in the Fed. Okay, so that's because they know they have to do something to achieve their official goals. Now, the other thing we need to look at is we have, I think over 20,000 Fed employees these days. And one of the things that's hard to get real good statistics on, that are more than anecdotal, all I really have here is anecdotal, is what are the real incentives that these people have as a group? And there appears to be a fair amount of back and forth traffic. People, go to work for the Fed, they go to a larger bank, and then sometimes they go from a larger bank to the Fed. Now, there has to be a reason. The Fed doesn't pay as well as the large banks do. People take a cut in pay to do this. So their real payoff as individuals, if there's going to be a monetary payoff, it's going to be working in the financial industry. This is just a fact of life. There are some that maybe have some social mission that they want to accomplish working in the Fed. There may be something that they feel they want to do, but what we have for the most part is people with highly specialized education that they've achieved at great sacrifice, that for one reason or another are taking a cut in pay to work with the Fed. And that's historically not been a good formula. If you want to see how that's been handled in a country fairly successfully, look at the example of Singapore. They basically, in their case, they had a corruption problem among their elected officials, and what Lee Kuo did in his, I think, great wisdom is he basically raised their salaries so that about 80% were making a little bit more than they'd been making under the old regime, and then said, okay, now we're going to have real regulations that keep people from getting money from any other source. And if you kind of look at the Corruption Perceptions Index in Singapore, it appears to have had beneficial effects. Now, that's another long discussion. We may cover that in a future video, but it's something that we need to at least consider quite seriously, okay, in terms of the real structure here and what the real incentives are. And one of the things that I think that deserves to be mentioned here is Charlie Munger once said, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." So this is something we need to look, this is something that the public should have figures on, is just where does people come from, where do they go, what changes for them. This is something that you don't want to be public about this. Don't work at the Fed. Okay, it's as simple as that. Now, one of the past videos that I reviewed here was super forecasting, and they looked at the forecast of collective processes versus people from the intelligence community. Now, I would suggest that on the whole, the intelligence community probably has a better predictive track record than the Fed. I don't have hard figures on that yet, but that's something that could be tabulated at a site like Metaculus if we had enough of a volunteer effort. It's not something that any one person can do, but if we got even just a dozen people working on this, in say 10% of their spare time, I think we could make a stab at it. And just see how well is the Fed really forecasting. There have been other people that have done less rigorous analysis that say it's not really that great. And good forecasting is available, unlike bankers, available relatively inexpensively. You just need to create the proper incentives, which means you need to be able to, you need to play it straight and pay for good forecasts, not what you want to hear, okay, which is what many large organizations tend to do. And I would say that in terms of structuring the Fed, we need to look at, say, creating, doing what Lee Kuo did, raise the salaries so they're closer to market rates, create at least some accounting on what these people's payoffs are, and create some real rewards for actually meeting the Fed's goals, and not just short term but long term. Okay, that because a lot of things they do may not kick in for 2 or 3 years after they're gone. So we have to be looking, I think, at least 5 to 10 years out. Now, there are some, fundamental questions. Okay, one, does the Fed really have the right goals? Okay, and that again may deserve its entire entire episode to it. I personally have a real reservation. I don't have a reservation around the stable prices. I think that their measures of inflation may be off, and there's an issue there. Okay, and I'm not entirely sure right now how to address that one, except maybe there needs to be research done on this, more research done on this issue of measuring inflation. But the other one is ensure maximum employment. Now, I would suggest that a better term right now might be ensure the optimum allocation of human resources, because there are a lot of important things that people do that are outside employment. And in the quest for maximizing employment, or along with that, we've done some strange things in the U.S. where people are neglecting those in favor of employment. We have people not having children to take meaningless jobs. Okay, we've addressed education in the sense of years of education. I think there's a lot of important aspects, like I say, of citizen education that have been neglected. I question, for example, our ability to staff juries. And that's something that I think that should be beefed up as part of any kind of overall economic program. That's stuff that needs to be looked at. We have issues like caregiving. If somebody's doing caregiving for a loved one at home, it doesn't count as GDP. If they go to a government facility that may not be as good, then it does count as GDP. And these are things that are kind of being lost in just lost in the noise of bad research. And does the Fed really have the right tools at its disposal to achieve these goals? Now, the Fed's main policies are banking regulation, control the money supply, and the bully pulpit of their economic research. And I think in terms of the bully pulpit of economic research, I don't think they've really used that well. I think that that a good assessment of the quality of the Fed research would show quite a bit. And that this may have to be a volunteer effort to really put that into perspective. I don't think it's going to come from academia or the corporate world or Congress as it's now structured. I just don't think any of them can come close to doing it. It's going to have to come from a grassroots effort. That's just the only way it's going to happen. Now, under present law, the Fed is prohibited from an industrial policy. The problem is that industrial policy may be among the real ways for them to achieve their goals, because technological innovation can put downward pressure on prices. Now, there's a bit of a problem there, I believe, in that when you have that downward pressure on prices, you also have an upward pressure on real estate and real estate and monopoly capital. And those need to be recaptured and applied, say, to broad tax cuts or basic income to achieve, to optimally utilize that in that context. And this is something that is not politically viable at this point in the U.S., but it is something that independent researchers can start to address. Okay, this is not necessarily radical. Richard Nixon, by the way, wanted an industrial policy. I mean, he was the last Republican, I believe, that talked about this issue meaningfully. Trump talked about it, but he didn't. He was not confronting his party establishment in any meaningful way that I could see. I mean, he made noise around this, but not a lot happened. Okay, it was just really empty rhetoric as far as I can tell. But no, a big increase in productivity accompanied by appropriate recapture might really do wonders in this situation. Okay. Now, the thing is that the Fed employs, as I've said, they're a group of people with, there are things that we know from the outside, what is going on there, and a lot of people focus on things like the board of governors and the high-profile positions, But I think that to meaningfully predict the behavior of the Fed, I think we need to take a little different tactic than that, or at least a tactic in addition to that. And this is a place where websites like Metaculus really might help. I mean, again, we can look at the predictive track record. We can do alternative research that shows just what's going to happen with a given policy, so that it basically says, like, this is when the Fed's, what they're doing is not in line with an independent model. And then the other one is that we can model what the group dynamics of this organization are as they change over time. And we know, for example, things like, age cohorts, okay? And there's an, one of the things that's going to come on my book is there are books on economic cycles that focus on cycles associated, say, with generational cycles, okay? And I'm not buying into this. I don't think it's ready for prime time yet, but with a little TLC, it might become better than it is now, and that might give us some tools to, look, for example, as there's change in the guard of the Fed, how this might impact things, and we might be able to better utilize the information that we have from the outside looking in at this. Now, I personally think that the Fed should be required to be more transparent than it is now. And I think that that we deserve a lot more information about just who these people are, their predictive track record, and their background, and that can be plugged into an appropriate model at some point. And I would like to have some more accountability of the Fed employees to ordinary citizens. One of the things I've thought about, both Congress and for that matter, the Fed employees, having these people grilled periodically by the citizens assembly. Just they get up in front of 20 people chosen at random from the voters and answer their questions. I mean, and it would kind of put these people on the spot, because I think what an honest analysis is going to show is the Fed has been very biased towards protecting the interest of the large financial firms that they're going to use to feather their nest, and to a lesser degree, investors, specific groups of investors, particularly larger investors. I think there's been some protection of smaller investors, but I think the bulk of the protection has gone to larger investors, and this needs to be evaluated carefully. Okay, it's a real issue, and I'm not saying that you don't need to have stability. I actually think that an honest model would show that you do need to have some broad stability, but you don't need to have the billionaire class making 5% a year after inflation on their money. That's not an essential function of the Fed, in my opinion. The work of Ed Wolf at NYU, I think, shows some very damning things on that, and that type of research needs to be expanded independently. So here's, I've laid out a bit of an agenda here for examining the Fed more closely. There are several things here that may deserve their own videos down the road. This is Randall Burns, As the World Burns, signing off. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe if this is at all useful to you. I want to get you more videos. I want to improve the quality of the videos. I know there's a long ways to go here. You deserve more than listening to an old guy just talking, and I aim to get that to you. I just need to learn to use a video editor better than I do and allocate my time better so that I can. But that is something that's planned later on this year, I hope. So, Randall Burns signing off. Thank you very much. This is a labor of love, both for my family and my loved ones, and for you guys. So take care. Bye.